Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Meditation 101. This will be a 4-week course. We'll meet for the next 4 Thursdays from 7 to 8:30. And then next month is Buddhism in a Nutshell. Those are the 2 introductory classes that kind of go together. Buddhism in a Nutshell will focus more on a broad overview of Buddhist philosophy for the most part. And Meditation 101, I describe Meditation 101 as giving people the information that they need to start a meditation practice at home, or perhaps to clarify questions or doubts about how, what are the parts of a practice and what's maybe the best way to design a practice at home. There are opportunities throughout Meditation 101 to do some group meditation practice, but I always describe the class as its purpose is to give people the tools that they need to actually start a practice. So it doesn't emphasize the group practice of meditation. We have morning and evening express meditation for that. That really is the goal of those classes, is group practice. So we will, as we go through the course, we'll talk more about motivation. That will also come up. It's one of the central tenets of Buddhism. So of course it comes up again and again. So you'll find it in Buddhism in a Nutshell as well. But so we'll talk in more detail about that process and the importance of that. But since this is just the beginning of the first class, let's still, though, take a moment to just reflect on what our interest was, when we saw the class on the website, what kind of thought process did we have? So just kind of take a moment and actually think back to that, what that motivation actually was at that time that led you through a chain of events to be here. Just trying to get clear on that. So often it could be that motivation is thinking that there would be benefit in one's own life if one could, learn how to meditate better or more consistently. It could be that we think about some of the disadvantages, some of the painful experiences that we've gone through, and that we may anticipate are a regular feature of our lives. And so we may anticipate going through them again, and we may feel that we might develop some skills in meditation that might help navigate those experiences. And all of those motivations are completely valid and extremely useful. Of course, it could be that the motivation is one where we want to change ourselves in order that through inner transformation, we find ourselves not only um, having an easier time navigating those difficult circumstances that we are accustomed to, but we also have more skill, more ability to be of benefit to those around us. When our mind is generally more calm, generally more spacious, when we can have a handle on the arising of anger and jealousy and, to some degree, ill will that might arise from time to time, then other people benefit. Those around us benefit by being around someone who is naturally more calm, naturally more generous, more peaceful, is not as quick to anger. And then perhaps too, in certain situations, we can share. In one way, we share as an example. We share, people might notice a change in our demeanor, our habits, our tendencies, and they might inquire. They might say, "Well, it seems like um, you're happier, you're more contented. Seems like you um, are able to go through challenging situations more easily than you were before. Like, have you done anything? Like, how do I get some of that too?" So I think that we share as just sort of by being an example of the benefits of that, but also too we might learn particular techniques, we might learn particular approaches that help us when anger arises, when jealousy arises, and then if other people are open to it, we can share, what has helped us in terms of specific tools or techniques. So this is to say that we might come to practice with the view that it's helpful for oneself. And that, as I said, is completely reasonable and valid. But that if we really get in touch with even that motivation, that shows us the sort of common ground that we share with all sentient beings. If it is helpful for oneself because we experience difficulties then it would also be helpful for others. And being around people who've internalized those benefits is necessarily of benefit to others. So we can use that more internal motivation or sort of self-directed motivation to as an entryway, as a doorway into thinking about what are the benefits of this for others, and wanting that as well, wanting to layer that on top. So and as I said, we'll talk more about that as we go along, but it's very helpful at the beginning of a session of meditation or a class to try to bring in what is this going to allow me to do more effectively that will have an impact on those around me that's beneficial, rather than only thinking about, I'm stressed out, I'm, anxious, and this is something that might reduce that. That's true, but we can also try to include those around us and really consciously think about how what we're learning is also of benefit to others. So now try to do that. Now try to take a moment to aspire to learn something in today's class in particular that you plan to use in a way that can be of that where you recognize the benefit not just to oneself. So just take a moment and try to set that intention. All right. Okay, so let's begin to talk in more detail. And then after a couple more minutes, I'll pause for questions or reflections. Start to go into a little bit more detail about what we mean when we say meditation, what is implied by that, and what is the kind of historical lineage that we at our center are going to be approaching that question from. So our center is part of FPMT, the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana tradition, and as such, it is steeped in Tibetan Buddhism, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, or as His Holiness says, the Nalanda tradition, the way that the teachings were packaged and held in Nalanda Monastery from India. So, because all of the teachings, of course, originated in India, and then Tibet kind of became a receptacle for holding a lineage of that Indian tradition. And then, of course, over the centuries, there were cultural influences as well that shaped how that was presented. But the essence of it, the real core, is from the Nalanda tradition in India. So meditation in this tradition, the word literally, when we use the word, we are translating a Tibetan word, which is gom, Gom. And the word gom means to become familiar. And if you hang around centers, you will also hear the word gompa, which is the place of meditation. And so if you go on retreat and what have you, people will refer to the room where people gather to engage in meditation as the gompa, the place where meditation is done. So what are we trying to become familiar with? We are intentionally trying to develop greater and greater familiarity with positive, constructive mental states. And so, of course, a question might arise at the beginning: how can we be so bold as to label one particular mental state as positive, which implies that a different mental state we could label as negative? Or there's different, I would say that there's different English. Of course, you'll find that there's many different ways, because in the Tibetan, in the Sanskrit, you might have a really nuanced meaning that's hard to get at in English. So it can be helpful to look at different ways of translating these words. So positive and negative is one way. Constructive and destructive is another. Beneficial, harmful is another. And what all of these categories are getting at is that the Buddha identified that reliably there are a grouping of states of mind that are, relatively speaking, balanced, realistic, relatively in tune with how things are. And when they arise, they tend to help a person to remain in contact with a sense of ease, a sense of peace, a sense of contentedness. And when a person is in contact with those states, it follows very closely that when that person engages in actions of the body, of speech, or of mind, those actions are actions that benefit those around them. When a person is in the throes of extreme jealousy, extreme anger, the things that they tend to say, the things that they tend to do, tend to harm those around them. But conversely, when a person is feeling contented, feeling at ease, then their speech, their actions, we find it easier to take into account the needs of others, to speak kindly, to speak considerately, because the mind is relatively calm, relatively peaceful, and relatively balanced. It's not grossly exaggerating. There's, we'll talk about the deeper layers of these states and how, and particularly in Buddhism in a nutshell. But, relatively speaking, comparatively speaking to the less positive states, the mind is at ease, the mind is contented. And when we interact, we will interact in ways that bring benefit. So of course, we know that meditation is something that we engage in for distinct periods of time, perhaps most days, every day, several days a week. So of course, given that, we wouldn't use that time to intentionally cultivate anger or jealousy or ill will. We would use that time to intentionally cultivate the opposite of those mental states: love, compassion, generosity, patience, ethics, concern for others, the kinds of states of mind that act in opposition to the harmful states of mind, the states of mind that do not bring peace to oneself and do not lead to actions that benefit others. So this is not a moralistic framework. We can ask ourselves, do I feel agitated? Do I feel disturbed? Does my mind feel painful? Does it feel tight and narrow? Or does my mind feel expansive? Does my mind feel ease? Do I feel a sense of um, warmth toward others? Do I feel connected? Do I feel open and receptive? And we can use that just internally to distinguish between positive and negative. It isn't some sort of external moralistic consideration. It is pain arising in my mind, or is ease arising in my mind? And that takes some familiarity with one's mind to, particularly at the deeper levels, but it's important to understand that this system that the Buddha observed doesn't come from, right and wrong in some sort of proscriptive external way. It's just there are states of mind that when they arise, either they cause pain or they cause contentment. And we can judge that internally for ourselves as they begin to arise. So then this gets at an important fundamental reality, which is that the mind is trainable. The mind can be directed in a positive way. We can, if we feel like right now, anger arises quite easily, jealousy arises quite easily. It's, the Buddha would say, that's simply the results of those tendencies being what we're deeply familiar with right now. In the future, in dependence upon training the mind, we can find ourselves being someone who's now deeply familiar with love and compassion and all of these beneficial states of mind. And that, I would say, is the fundamental premise of a meditation practice. Just like the fundamental premise of an exercise, a physical exercise regime, is the concept that in the future, our body can be in a state of health that's greater than it is right now. Our mind can be in a state of health, can be in a state of alignment with what's true, with what's valid, with what's beneficial in the future than what is currently what we are experiencing. And the difference between, of course, all analogies break down somewhere. The difference between those two analogies is that our physical body is something that we can only train to a certain point. And then we stop. And then, even though we've achieved that, the body is subject to the laws of physics, it's subject to the aging process, and so we will experience, a decline to some degree. Of course, we can ameliorate that decline to one degree or another, but we will inevitably experience a decline. Whereas the mind is an energy that is different than that. So the tendencies and the habits that we deeply ingrain in the mind, those we can build upon and build upon. Buddhism would say in more than one lifetime, which is also another difference with the physical body. We only have one kind of evolution of this particular physical body, and then there's an apex of that healthfulness, and then there's a general decline. Buddhism would say that the mind is something that can be limitlessly developed, that there is no stopping point. Whether enlightened beings continue to, I don't know if they continue to improve, but a Buddha is someone who has perfected their mind. So maybe once we've done that, that's good enough, and we're okay to say that that's the end point. Um, Whereas the body can never really be perfected. It can only reach a certain level of development, and then, it's going to taper off. Yeah. So let me pause for thoughts, questions that are happening so far. No? All right. So, in the vein of talking about meditation more precisely, as we've just done with what its purpose is, we'll now talk about sort of the mechanics of what is really supportive and really helpful. So, of course, what we've described is a mental process. We've described training the mind, which we've defined as a non physical energy. But we do find ourselves embodied. We do find ourselves as a physical body and a mind that's combined right now. And so when we meditate, there is wisdom, there is knowledge about what to do with the physical body to make that process of training the mind go better, to what is the best way of sitting and stabilizing the body so that we can just focus on the session without the aches and the pains that arise in the body. And also we'll talk about one aspect of what we'll go into, which is the posture for meditation. One reason for it is at the deeper levels of absorption, meditative absorption, there's a relaxation response in the body that happens. And if our body's not kind of like prepared for that, then for one, we might be distracted in ways that make it more difficult to get to that level. But two, when we get to that level, we might not be able to sustain a different kind of posture. We might not, the body might not physically be stable enough to deal with that relaxation response that happens. And, certainly many meditators never, at least when we say never, of course, from our perspective, that's just this lifetime. When we say, well, I'll probably never reach that level of meditation, what we mean is I won't do it in this lifetime. And, for many people that may be true. They may not get to that deep level of absorption, but these are also, Buddhism would say that these are tendencies and these are habits that carry over. So I would say even the familiarity with the posture and that habit, if we take the posture seriously, as to the best that we can, then like with all of the other habits that we are putting into the mind, that's also that kind of seriousness is also being put into the mind. And Buddhism would say that in future lives, all of it, all of those imprints are still there, and perhaps it's also easier. Now, that's not to say that if we can't achieve all of the parts of this posture that we'll discuss, then we just shouldn't meditate, or we should just give up. Or it isn't to say that at all. This is the ideal posture. Many people have difficulty with the ideal posture. Um, so we can aspire, perhaps, to move in the direction of the ideal posture, if we do find it difficult, which we likely will. So we will, when we're discussing this, we'll start with the legs. So meditation is done seated. And here, what we will assume is that the person is using a cushion on the floor rather than a chair. If you feel like right now that a cushion on the floor is not a viable option, then don't, as I said, we're talking about this as the ideal. And what maybe steps do you think, or do we think that we can use to move in the direction of the ideal? And if we decide that, all of it seems implausible, then don't worry. Just um, we can aspire in our next life to be more flexible and to, so I wouldn't take this as if we, can't do this, or if we're pretty confident that it's never going to fully happen, that that's some sort of tragedy. It's certainly not. So there's different options. Again, if we just assume that we're using a cushion on the floor, we have different options for the legs. The most basic position for the legs is just cross-legged, just one foot, on top of the other, tucked in. That's the best place to start if we feel like flexibility is, kind of not on our side. Eventually, we may progress to what's called the half lotus, where we have one foot resting on one thigh and then the other foot tucked in. So one foot is elevated up on one thigh and the other foot is underneath that other leg. There's really not, that I've come across, there's really not a lot of practices. Yoga, of course, is, I think, what a lot of people do to become more flexible, but yoga is kind of a different sort. It isn't a Buddhist technology, you could say. It's Hindu in origin, but of course, very helpful for the mind-body connection, very helpful for flexibility. You've also got Tai Chi, Qigong, but again, these are not Tibetan Buddhist technologies, but they're very helpful to develop this sort of flexibility. There isn't a particular system like that arose in Tibet. So what they kind of say, apart from those systems, which I think are all very helpful, apart from that, what they say is, if you can, let's say you're starting cross-legged, if it's possible to take your right foot, let's say, and kind of put it somewhere kind of near the other thigh, even for just a couple of seconds. To do that, if you feel like it's not going to be painful, if you feel like you're not going to injure anything, if you can kind of get it up in that general vicinity, to do that for just maybe a couple of seconds, and start every session that way, with a couple of seconds of doing that. And then go back to cross-legged, after those couple of seconds. And then over time, if you meditate every day, or you get to meditating every day, you just add a couple more seconds, you add a couple more seconds. And you might find after a few months, 6 months, 8 months, maybe you can do half lotus. Maybe a year and a half, you can do half lotus by just kind of stretching for those couple of seconds at the beginning of every session. So if you want to experiment. Ideally, for the legs, we would do full lotus or the Vajra position, which is where both feet are resting on the opposing thighs. So you have, the right foot on the left thigh, the left foot on the right thigh. Very difficult for most people. But again, once, if you progress to half lotus, then now all you have to do is now first couple of seconds, with the other foot, trying to get that up into position and then just stretching it like that. So those are the three possibilities for the legs. The next thing that we'll talk about is the back. And this is a really important part of the posture, perhaps probably the most important part of the posture, is to really try to maintain an upright spine as you meditate. So we really try to avoid being hunched. We really try to avoid, leaning back or leaning to the sides. We really want to have, a really nice upright spine, where our torso is kind of a little bit back, a little bit open, so that the energies are flowing and the spine is nice and upright. So they say to think about the spinal column as being like a stack of coins or a column of light. And you don't want those coins to tip over. You don't want that column of light to break. You want it to just remain completely vertical. And this is something that we try to maintain an awareness of throughout the session of meditation. That's part of developing kind of good hygiene, good habits, is to check in, because this is all, if we haven't really meditated, then when we start, particularly again, if we're using a cushion, we're kind of activating small stabilizing muscles in various places. And there's going to be a little bit of fatigue and could be some discomfort. We never want to do anything painful, but because it's new, there may be some, discomfort. So we want to check in, and because it's easy to start slouching, it's easy to start, kind of moving in a more comfortable way rather than just continuing to activate those stabilizing muscles. And but this is another reason why we try to keep our sessions short, so that we're not fatiguing ourselves too much, and we're not overdoing it too soon and then really developing bad habits. Okay, so then the hands and the arms is what we'll look at next. So we're seated on the floor, our legs are crossed in some way. We've really tried to maintain an upright spine. And now, generally what we would do is we take our right hand and we would put it on top of the left hand, and we would just touch the thumbs just gently, and then place that up against the body in the lap, kind of right on a relaxed belly, just kind of right up against a relaxed belly like that. And we just kind of hold it that way. We want to think about not having our elbows like really tightly up against the body, but we also don't want to really push them out too much, but we want to have some circulation, some airflow. So we want to kind of, just kind of don't let them totally flop against against your hips, against your sides. So you just kind of sort of gently keep them a little bit elevated, so that, and again, this goes with, the torso being open and having a nice upright position. Okay. So then the eyes is another part. They call it a posture, but this one of the eyes are part of this posture. We have to do something with our eyes. So oftentimes people will close their eyes, and that's okay. Particularly, at the beginning, I think most people feel more comfortable like that, and that's all right. Um, if if we can get into the habit, though, of having a little bit of light coming in, um, you know, kind of just slightly having the eyes open. Some advanced meditators um, have their eyes completely open. I that's something maybe to think about, to work toward. It might be a little bit too distracting in the beginning, too much visual input. It's very good to learn to reject that visual input, essentially, because the mind, we know, I mean, the mind and the brain, of course, are related. They're interdependent, interrelated, and we know that the brain has a huge um, part of it devoted to processing of visual information, visual stimuli. So learning to be able to have that visual field, but rejecting it in terms of, not getting interested in it, not getting, that, in the same way too, that we also need to learn to reject auditory stimulation. That's how, birds chirping and, maybe the upstairs neighbor being a little bit too, whatever. That's also part of the process, is tuning that out. So in a way, um, taking as our goal, maybe thinking down the road about opening the eyes a bit more, uh, can be really helpful, can really help to learn to focus on the mental object that we're meditating on, um, even in the face of this kind of um, visual stimuli that's happening, because it's we become better meditators, essentially, rather than just like, thinking, oh well, it has to be a completely dark room, and I have to have, mufflers on, and if that's our approach, and if that's our only approach ever, then we don't really challenge ourselves in the same way, and we won't grow, we won't learn how to do it, even in the face of these distractions. um, so, but one of the reasons that we try to keep the eyes at least just slightly open is that more light will come in, and that will be a natural antidote to drowsiness. If our eyes are, really shut, then then it's quite dark. And we might find ourselves tending, as the body relaxes, and as we might find it kind of a bit dull what we're doing, and then we might tend toward drowsiness. Okay, so we'll just go through the remaining points, and then again I'll pause for questions. So the jaw and the tongue are other parts of the posture, and basically what they say is that the jaw should be nice and relaxed. We shouldn't be kind of clenching. We shouldn't be tightly trying to press the teeth together. If the teeth can be slightly apart, that's quite good. Um, and the lips, the mouth should be closed. We shouldn't, we should be breathing through the nose if possible, breathing in and out through the nose. If we're quite stuffed up, then of course, it's fine to breathe through the mouth, but generally we should try to get in the habit of breathing through the nose and have the mouth closed, because otherwise the mouth tends to dry out and we tend to be distracted by that if there's a lot of air going in and out. And what they say is that the tongue should slightly rest on the upper palate. That I feel like that kind of just depends on how big your mouth is, how big your tongue is. Sometimes it just kind of does that when your mouth is closed. But if you find that you have kind of a choice about whether you can rest your tongue on the upper palate, kind of behind the teeth, or not, then they say that it's good to try to get into the habit of resting the tongue on the upper palate behind the teeth. They say that that will decrease the number of times that you need to swallow saliva during the session, and that's helpful in terms of concentrating on the, and again, with respect to these deeper states of absorption, it's good to reduce that sort of autonomic process as much as we can. And then, so the last point is the head, what we're doing with our head in meditation. So again, we want to have it, in line with the midline of the body. So, we don't want it to be kind of doing anything like that or back. We kind of want to have it centered. It does have a slight kind of downward tilt. So of course we're not looking, up at the ceiling. We're not looking straight down at our feet, but we just want to have a slightly downward, angle to the head. Okay. So basically they say that the gaze, if we have like a, 20% of our eyelid open at the very bottom, our gaze should just kind of be, like our knees and the floor in front. Should just sort of be very unfocused and should be kind of, so if we're seeing something that's like level, then that's, we want to be kind of more so the knees, more so the ground in front. So those are the aspects of the posture. Any questions about anything that we've covered so far? Nope. Okay.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
On your back, if you keep your back straight and you have it properly aligned, is it a problem if it touches something? Like if you're not really leaning into the back of the chair, but the back of the chair is preventing you from falling backwards, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, um, if you feel like that's sort of necessary or help, because I mean, again, in a way that is reducing these stabilizing muscles and things.
Okay.
You know, but if you feel like, so I would just say, try it both ways, maybe, and that also depends on what kind of chair it is. Sometimes it's ideally for a chair, you want it to be more so straight and not like have a strong, decline in the seat, so where it's sort of where your angle is kind of more like that. You want it to be, kind of more like a 90 degree. That's, and of course it can be nice and padded, but you don't want it to be kind of where it's forcing you kind of backward because of the angle. Um, so I would say try it, maybe just scoot a little bit forward and try it. And it could be that one out of every four times you scoot forward and the other three, so it doesn't have to be all or nothing, or, I would just say try it both ways. And again, like with the legs, and it's about gradually kind of working up to things. um so if we never scoot forward, then we're not giving ourselves an opportunity to maybe get those muscles stronger.
Thank
But
you. I think my problem is that finding a seat that has a parallel
yeah,
path to it. And the part of my problem is that the seats I'm using sort of tend to push me in that direction.
yeah, yeah, it's kind of like the almost like kitchen chairs, or kind of like with the straight back and it's kind of almost more like those sorts of chairs that work better. um yeah.
Thank you, Venerable.
Okay, so now we'll talk about the skills that we rely on, the mental skills. We talked about, kind of the physicality of it. But with respect to the mental part of it, there are two main skills that we have already, and that we rely on and that we cultivate um, in different ways as we meditate. And these are what are called mindfulness and concentration. Um, so, concentration is the ability to hold an object in mind without distraction. Um, the extent to which we can bring an object to mind and just remain on that object without the mind going to any other object is concentration. Mindfulness is more like, another phrase is introspective awareness. And it is the skill of knowing what is happening in the mind as it's happening. It is kind of a watchfulness of the session of meditation. So, of course, we probably have all meditated, a couple of times, tried it, and we've all found that, we might intend to focus on the breath or focus on whatever it might be, but we find that other thoughts, other feelings, emotions, memories, they intrude on what we set out to do. We thought we would hold the mind to the breath, and instead, we think about dinner, we think about a fight that we had, whatever. And in the beginning, commonly, we recognize that that has happened a couple of minutes after it started happening. So we recognize, oh, for the last 3 minutes, I've been thinking about this thing I have to do at work, or I've been thinking about what I'd like to have for dinner, and I was planning out going to the store and shopping and bringing it home and how good it's going to taste. And there was this whole elaborate story that's been going on for 3 or 4 minutes out of my 10 minute, session. Um, and so that is an indication that our mindfulness, well, and of course, and our concentration, but the fact that the mind moved to a different object is a lack of concentration, the mental muscle of concentration is not as strong as it could be. The fact that we didn't notice for 3 or 4 minutes is an indication that our mindfulness is not as strong as it could be. Because what we would like to do is notice within a couple of seconds that the mind has shifted to something other than the intended object, so that we can bring it right back to the intended object. And then eventually, we can actually, what they say in the texts is that it's possible to notice that the mind is about to leave the object, that the mind is like moving off, the mind is still on the object, but that like the mind has started to drift in a different direction. And then we can, just tighten the focus a little bit, to remain on the object without that distraction actually blossoming. Um, so and again, in the same way that we train the physical body to become more flexible a few seconds at a time, and we start from a point that's quite far away from where we would like to end up. With mindfulness and concentration, we're training the mind to move in a direction, and we start from a place that's very, very far away from where we would like to end up. Because we do find 5-10 minutes goes by sometimes, or we end the session and we're like, oh, 90% of that session I was just absorbed in this grievance that I have, or this, whatever it might be. And so that, that's the starting point, but the ending point is really being able to concentrate the mind on a chosen object, really for as long as one might like. So with a breathing meditation, for example, the sensation of the air moving in and out of the nostrils, that's the object. And to the extent that that is the only thing arising in the mind is concentrated. To the extent to which we quickly observe something else arising and we move the mind back, that is the extent to which we're being quite mindful of that session of meditation, rather than just kind of having so this is also part of the hygiene, kind of hygiene habits that I was talking about, where with our physical body, if we try to take it kind of seriously to the best of our ability, and not just kind of just be willy-nilly and think, well, I'll listen to music and maybe I'll stop and read from time to time, or or I'll get up and answer the phone. You know, with this, if we really tell ourselves that I'm going to try to notice as quickly as possible. So this is about not indulging. We might not get it. We might not answer the phone. We might not, move. We might stay quite still. But if we have this attitude of, well, whatever story arises, it's okay if I just follow it. that is another hygiene issue that is going to cause us problems down the line. We won't ever really develop strong mindfulness and strong concentration if we just indulge. Of course, distractions absolutely arise. That's completely natural. It's not to judge the arising of distractions, but it is to judge what we consciously do once distractions have arisen. Are we going to maintain a sense of vigilance and go back to the object again and again, or are we just going to be like, well, okay, I'll go ahead and think about this. I'll go ahead, because that's very much like getting up and answering the phone just without actually getting up. Um, so we need to take this part of it seriously too. And when distractions arise, move the mind back to the object. We shouldn't get, angry at ourselves or feel like we failed or when, that there's something wrong. We just simply say, oh, a distraction arose. That's not the intended object. I'll go back to the intended object. And we do that each and every time a distraction arises, which will strengthen concentration and will strengthen mindfulness. Any questions? No questions. Coda, you can put them you can type them if you're having Wi-Fi issues. You can put them in the chat. No. Okay. So, as I said, there are some group meditations that are part of this class. So let's go ahead and do that. Um, we'll do maybe 2 10-minute meditations with a break in between. And the purpose of these two is to demonstrate these twin processes of concentration and mindfulness, because we use them in differing amounts at different times. So we'll do a breathing meditation, and then we'll do what's called a bare awareness meditation. And we'll see how those skills are emphasized differently or one is more emphasized in one meditation than the other. So do the best that you can to settle the body in that posture that we've discussed as best you can. A chair is fine. Don't need to get on the floor and have your computer up somewhere else. But just try to adopt a stable, comfortable, upright position. Hands are in the lap, right over left, with the palms upturned and the thumbs gently touching. Our eyes are gently closed or perhaps slightly open. We really try to keep the back nice and straight. Our gaze is slightly downward. And we just try to relax. And try to maintain an upright spine, but try not to have any unnecessary tension. And then just begin to breathe normally and naturally, ideally through your nose. And try to pay attention to whatever sensations you can discern in your upper lip, the area around the opening of the nostrils, on both the in-breath and the out-breath. Giving yourself the instruction that that one physical sensation is the object, the intended object of the meditation, and anything that arises in the mind that is other than that object is a distraction. And when distraction arises, I will lift my attention up from the distraction without judgment or frustration, and gently but firmly place it back on the breath again and again. So do your best to try to maintain that one object, whatever sensation arises in the area around the nostrils, on both the in-breath and the out-breath. And then when you're ready, we'll come back together. Any questions or reflections or thoughts?
My I seem to do okay with not being distracted by thoughts, but I do have a lot of problems being distracted by external noises. They seem to be able to grab my mind a lot more easily than the thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, we do need to take care. You know, they certainly don't recommend, trying to meditate in, next to traffic or, certainly we make an effort to find a calm, quiet location, in the beginning to deal with that as much as possible. You know, it's really, there's not, I don't know of any like specific way of quickening, um, being able to handle that. It's it's really just a function of the concentrated mind, because when there's just the object arising in the mind, then even if there is sound, or even it's not apprehended by a concentrated mind. The mind is, it's kind of similar to how, we've all had experiences where we were really engrossed in a movie, or a game, or a conversation with a really interesting person, or and then that ended, and we realized, oh, an hour went by, or two, or like, or you're suddenly you're hungry because you haven't eaten. You forgot to, because you were so, it's kind of like that. And there really isn't anything that we can do other than try to aspire to meditating at least once every day. It's really the consistency, of it. So starting with, if we're not meditating every day, then we try to, work on that. Of course, if we're doing it once a week, that's great. Then we try to do it twice a week and 3 times a week, um, and then once we get to every day, then we can think about, well, could I do it twice, twice a day, every day? Can I get up to 2 or 3 times? Once you get up to 3, 4, for most people, that's probably the max that is reasonable. And of course, on the weekends, we can do more. We have more time. Um, but you know, twice a day, every day, 3 times a day, every day is a really good habit. Um, and then it's really just building the strength of our mindfulness and our concentration. Um, you know, but yeah, we should certainly try to avoid those more intense external stimuli uh, as best we can in the beginning. Um, and it's really just about, the concentration is the opposite of distraction, right? And all great meditators started out being incredibly distracted, having a very, kind of flighty mind. And um, whatever the distraction is, regardless of its nature, it's simply something that's other than the intended object. So our job is just to have an intended object, so not to just be like, well, I'll meditate, but I don't know what it's going to, we have to decide what the object is prior to the session. And then our job is just to notice the arising of distraction, lift our awareness up from the distraction and place it back on the intended object. Um, and if we do that a lot, we'll get really good at holding the mind to the intended object. Um, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so we'll just end then with the second, the bare awareness meditation. And this, but previously, because we gave ourselves one intended object that was very specific and very defined, then that was emphasizing concentration. We needed to still use mindfulness to know when that object wasn't arising, when a different object was arising. That's true. But the nature of that meditation was more emphasizing concentration. This meditation will emphasize mindfulness, it will emphasize being aware of what's happening in the mind. Uh, okay. So again, just find a comfortable and stable upright position. And again, we'll start with the breath. We'll still use the breath as kind of an anchor for the meditation. So try to find that sensation with your awareness. And then go ahead and just loosen your grip on that sensation. Holding it in the mind so that you can come back to it, so that it's grounding you, but allow your mind to just become aware of whatever is naturally arising. These mental events might sometimes be memories, they might be other bodily sensations, they might be plans, thoughts of the future. Just try to observe without getting caught up, without elaborating, without rejecting, just noticing. There's various mental events arise and pass away. Maintain the anchor of the breath. And then when you're ready, we'll come back. All right. Any thoughts or questions? On the event page that you use to get here, there's a materials link, and that has all of the handouts for the course. These two meditations are part of those handouts. So you're welcome to download all of that. We are just about out of time. Any final thoughts for today? All right. Well, I hope to see everybody back next week. And yeah, maybe practice these two over the week, and then we can talk about people's experience, if you would like.
Thank you, Venerable Dondrub.
All right. Have a great night.
You too.
Thank you.